Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Science of Ageless Living. I'm your host, Dr. Ethan Hausman Marquis, and today we're diving into one of the most fascinating and rapidly evolving frontiers in longevity medicine. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to age gracefully, staying energetic and healthy into their 80s and beyond, while others face age-related diseases much earlier? Sure, we know that lifestyle matters: diet, exercise, stress, sleep. But what if I told you there's another layer, a genetic blueprint, quietly shaping your journey through life? Today, we're exploring those genetic pathways to longevity, and specifically, how a revolutionary tool called Polygenic Risk Scores, or PRS, could unlock a new era of truly personalized, ageless interventions. Now, I know polygenic risk scores might sound a bit like something out of a genetics conference, but stick with me. By the end of this episode, my goal is that you'll not only understand what PRS are, but also see exactly how they could change the way you think about your own health, your own strategies for living longer and better, and maybe even the little decisions you'll make tomorrow morning. So, what exactly are we talking about? Well, unlike those single gene conditions you might have learned about in school, think cystic fibrosis or sickle cell disease, most traits, including how quickly we age, are influenced by hundreds, even thousands of small genetic variations. Polygenic risk scores take all these tiny differences, add them up, and give us a kind of genetic risk profile for things like heart disease, diabetes, or even biological aging itself. But here's where it gets really exciting. We're moving beyond simply knowing your risk. Scientists and clinicians are beginning to use this information to tailor interventions, everything from nutrition and exercise to supplements, peptides, and emerging therapies based on your unique genetic signature. Imagine a future where your anti-aging strategy is as individualized as your fingerprint. So, wherever you are right now, maybe curled up with a cup of tea, maybe on a walk, maybe powering through a workout, settle in. Over the next half hour, we're going to unpack how your genes influence how you age, and more importantly, what you can actually do with that knowledge. Let's get started. Let's start with something simple but profound. Your genes are not your destiny. I want you to really let that sink in. We've all grown up with this old way of thinking. Maybe you've even said it yourself. Well, my father had a heart attack at 55, so I probably will too. Or, on the flip side, my grandmother lived to 100, so I must have inherited those good genes. I don't have to worry. It's comforting in a way, right? We look to our family history as a kind of crystal ball, a peek into what our own future might hold. But here's the thing, it's not that simple. Genes don't dictate fate, they dictate probability. They set the stage, but they do not write the script. Let me give you an analogy that I love. Think of your DNA as the opening chapter of a book. That opening chapter introduces the characters, maybe hints at some plot twists, and sets the mood for what's to come. But it doesn't tell you how the story ends. You're the author for the rest of the novel. The choices you make, the experiences you have, these shape the narrative in ways your genes can only suggest. This is where modern medicine has made a remarkable breakthrough. We can now read that opening chapter in exquisite detail. Not just the dramatic sentences, the big well-known genes like BRCA, which is associated with breast cancer risk, or APOE, which affects Alzheimer's risk, but also the commas, the punctuation marks, the subtle nudges, the little details that on their own might not seem significant, but together, over thousands of genetic variants, start to paint a much richer picture of your health and aging journey. And that's exactly what polygenic risk scores, or PRS, are all about. Instead of looking at just one gene or a handful, PRS analyze hundreds, sometimes thousands of genetic variants. Some of these variants might push your risk for a certain disease up by a tiny amount. Others might nudge it down. Alone, they're whispers in the crowd. Together, they become a chorus, one that can help us understand your personal probability for things like heart disease, diabetes, or even how quickly you biologically age. But, and this is crucial, probability is not certainty. Think of it like the weather forecast. Just because there's a higher chance of rain doesn't mean you'll definitely get wet. If you bring an umbrella, or better yet, stay inside, you can avoid the storm altogether. So yes, your genes matter. They matter a lot. But what you do with that information, how you live, how you eat, how you move, how you manage stress, those things can shift the story. They can turn a family history of early heart disease into a personal story of resilience and health. They can take a genetic risk for Alzheimer's and motivate you to build a brain-healthy lifestyle decades before symptoms ever appear. In other words, you're not just a passenger in your genetic journey. You're the driver. You have the wheel. And that's the promise of this ageless science. By understanding your genetic probabilities, not destinies, you can make smarter, more personalized choices. You can start to write the story you want, no matter what the opening chapter says. That's the true power of polygenic risk scores. And it's only the beginning. Let's dive into a concept that's reshaping how we think about health and longevity, the polygenic risk score. If you've never heard that phrase before, don't worry. By the end of this segment, you'll not only know what it means, but you'll also understand why it just might be one of the most important health tools of the 21st century. So let's define it. A polygenic risk score is, at its core, a calculation. But it's not just any simple math. It's a calculation that takes into account hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions, of tiny genetic variations scattered across your DNA. Each of these variations, on their own, might nudge your risk for a disease ever so slightly up or down. Think of it like a massive crowd where each person whispers a vote. A little higher, a little lower, maybe no change at all. On their own, those whispers are barely noticeable, but when you add them all together, they create a chorus, a unified signal that can tell us something truly meaningful about your health. Here's an example. One tiny genetic change might increase your risk for diabetes by just 1%. Another might lower your Alzheimer's risk by 0.5%. On their own, these numbers are almost meaningless, just tiny blips in the grand scheme of your genes. But when you add up all those little nudges across your entire genome, you suddenly have a powerful predictor. A polygenic risk score essentially bundles all those effects into a single, easy-to-understand number. And what does that number tell you? It doesn't give you certainty. It doesn't say, you will get this disease or you're safe forever. Instead, it says, compared to the average person, you're at a higher risk, a lower risk, or somewhere in between. It's less like a light switch, on or off, and more like a dimmer, giving you a range of probabilities. You move from a world of blunt yes or no answers into the realm of probability curves and personalized risk. Let's pause for a second and think about why this matters so much. For decades, medicine has operated on averages. Doctors would say, well, the average person at your age has this much risk for heart disease, or most people with your family history should do X. But the truth is, none of us are average. We're unique combinations of genes, experiences, and environments. Polygenic risk scores take your individual genetics and translate them into a personalized risk profile. It's like getting a weather forecast just for you instead of for the whole city. And that personalized forecast, it's powerful. Once you know your probabilities, you can make smarter choices. Imagine knowing you have a higher than average risk for a certain condition, not as a sentence, but as valuable information. You can start tailoring your prevention strategies. Maybe you focus more on your diet, ramp up your exercise, get earlier screenings, or talk to your doctor about specific supplements. You could even adjust your medical interventions, not based on what works for the average patient, but what works best for your genetic blueprint. This is the future of medicine. Not one size fits all, but one size fits you. Polygenic risk scores are at the forefront of this movement. They take the mystery out of your genetics and turn it into actionable insight. It's about empowerment. It's about taking the driver's seat in your own aging journey. So as we continue to explore the science of ageless living, remember this: your genes aren't a crystal ball, but they are a map. And polygenic risk scores are helping us read that map with more accuracy than ever before. The more we understand our unique risks, the more we can personalize our path to a longer, healthier, and more vibrant life, no matter where we started. Let's make all this science real with a story. Picture this: 2 patients walk into my office. Both are 50 years old, both exercise a couple times a week, both eat reasonably well. Neither one smokes. If you just looked at their health checklists, you'd think they were basically the same person. On paper, they're almost twins. But here's where it gets interesting. We decide to dig deeper. We sequence their genomes and run their polygenic risk scores. Suddenly, a whole new world of information opens up. It turns out one of these patients falls into the top 10% of genetic risk for coronary artery disease. That's heart disease. The other, they're in the bottom 20% for that same risk. Now, if I didn't have this information, I'd probably give both of them the same advice. Eat a little better, exercise a little more, keep an eye on your stress. Good, solid advice, but not personalized. But with these polygenic risk scores in hand, everything changes. The science lets me create 2 completely different, highly tailored plans. For the high-risk patient, we're not going to mess around. We're going to get aggressive about managing their lipids, the fats in their blood that can clog arteries. We'll look into advanced options like vascular peptides, which can help protect the blood vessels. The diet plan, much stricter. And we'll have a serious conversation about whether it makes sense to start medications or interventions earlier than we typically would, even before any symptoms show up. We're playing offense, not defense, because their genetics put them on a different playing field. Now, for the lower risk patient, we take a different approach. There's no reason to over-medicalize. Instead, we focus on resilience, keeping them strong, building muscle, supporting their mitochondria, the powerhouses of their cells, so they stay vibrant and healthy for years to come. No need for unnecessary medications or interventions. We're simply maintaining what's already working well for their unique biology. Here's the amazing part. Same age, same lifestyle, but completely different genetic forecasts. And that leads to completely different medical strategies. This is what's so powerful about polygenic risk scores. They take you from generic one-size-fits-all advice to precision medicine crafted for your unique risk profile. So next time you hear about personalized medicine or genetic health, remember this story. It's not just buzzwords. It's about truly understanding the individual in front of you, not just their habits, but their hidden genetic landscape. And that's how we move from guessing to knowing, from hoping to acting, and from aging to ageless living. That's the power of polygenic risk scores. And that's the future of medicine. Welcome back to the science of ageless living. Today, we're going to connect the dots between genetics, aging, and what you can actually do right now to change your own health trajectory. This isn't about vague promises or magic pills. This is about understanding how your unique biology sets the stage for how you age and how science is unlocking the tools to personalize your path toward a longer, healthier life. We often talk about polygenic risk scores, those numbers that tell you, based on dozens or even hundreds of genetic variants, what your personal risk is for certain diseases or aging pathways. But what does that mean in practical terms? Where do these scores really make a difference? Today, I want to walk you through the 5 major biological systems where polygenic risk scores can literally change the way we think about longevity and prevention. Let's start at the core, your DNA. Every single day, your DNA is under constant assault. Sunlight, pollution, toxins from the environment, free radicals from the food you eat, and even just the normal wear and tear of your metabolism, all of these things are bombarding your genetic material. But here's the thing, your body is equipped with an incredible repair crew. Genes like PARP and ATM are responsible for detecting DNA damage and orchestrating the repair process. But what if your polygenic risk score tells us that your DNA repair machinery is a little sluggish, that your repair crew isn't as efficient as it could be? That's not just a number. That's personal information we can act on. If your DNA repair is weak, you're at higher risk for cancer, for accelerated aging, for all the chronic diseases that come from cellular malfunction. So what do? For people with high risk in this pathway, we get proactive. We focus on NAD plus replenishment because NAD plus fuels those repair enzymes. We look at sirtuin activation, supporting those genes that help keep the repair crew working over time. We make sure to minimize avoidable radiation and toxins, and we double down on reducing oxidative stress through nutrition, lifestyle, and sometimes supplementation. It's about fortifying the cell's repair shop so you're protected for the long haul. Next, let's talk about metabolism, how your body handles energy, food, fat, and sugar. Genes like FTO and TCF7L2 play huge roles in this system. Some people are genetically wired to store fat more easily, to have higher blood sugar, or to respond poorly to certain foods. If your polygenic risk score in metabolic regulation is high, your margin for error with things like sugar and processed carbs is razor thin. What does this mean for you? It means you can't just wing it with nutrition. For these folks, we often use tools like continuous glucose monitoring, so you can literally see in real time how your body responds to different meals. We design precision nutrition plans tailored to your genetics. We might leverage advanced therapies like GLP-1 agonist peptides or tesamorelin to help the body manage insulin and metabolism more effectively. And of course, exercise is non-negotiable, especially plans designed to maximize insulin sensitivity. For people with high metabolic risk, prevention is not optional. It's essential. We build a system so you can thrive, not just survive. Now let's talk about inflammation. You might have heard the term inflammaging. It's the idea that chronic low-grade inflammation is at the heart of age-related decline. Some people, because of their genetics, are much more likely to have overactive immune responses or to develop autoimmune diseases or to experience chronic inflammation that damages tissues over time. If your polygenic risk score flags you as someone prone to excessive inflammation, we take it seriously. We focus on anti-inflammatory nutrition. Think lots of phytonutrients, omega-3s, and foods that calm the immune system. We sometimes use immunomodulating peptides, like the mosin alpha-1, to help balance immune activity. Sleep becomes a top priority because poor sleep stokes the fires of inflammation. We also look at stress management as a medical intervention, not just a lifestyle tip. For some, we even consider advanced strategies like rapamycin, a powerful tool for modulating immune aging, always under careful supervision. This is not about suppressing the immune system. It's about guiding it so it protects you without turning on you. Next up, the mitochondria, the little batteries in your cells. They're responsible for producing the energy that powers everything you do, from thinking to moving to healing. Genes like PGC1A regulate how many mitochondria you have, how well they work, and how resilient they are to stress. If your polygenic risk score tells us your mitochondrial function is weak, that's a red flag for fatigue, slower recovery, and increased vulnerability to aging. So what do? We focus on exercise, especially high-intensity interval training, HIIT, which stimulates mitochondrial growth. We look at mitochondrial peptides like MOTSC or SS31 to directly support mitochondrial health. We supplement with nutrients like CoQ10 and PQQ, which fuel the mitochondria and help them resist damage. And we work hard to reduce exposure to environmental toxins because heavy metals, pesticides, and pollutants can cripple these tiny power plants. When your mitochondria are strong, your whole system is resilient. It's foundational for ageless living. Finally, let's talk about the brain, because longevity without cognitive health isn't really longevity at all. The gene APOE4 is probably the most famous when it comes to Alzheimer's risk, but there are dozens of other variants, BN1, CLU, ABK7, and more, that shape your brain's destiny as you age. If your polygenic risk score flags you for higher risk of neurodegeneration, you do not wait until memory problems show up. You start protecting your brain now. That means optimizing sleep, because sleep is when your brain clears out toxins and consolidates memories. We support NAD+ metabolism in the brain, which helps neurons resist aging. We use exercise and sometimes peptides to boost BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which acts like fertilizer for your neurons. And we encourage cognitive training and lifelong learning, challenging your brain with new skills, new languages, new puzzles. The goal is to build up your cognitive reserve while your brain is still healthy, so you're protected against decline later. Let's step back for a moment. Why does all this matter? Because aging is not a one-size-fits-all process. Two people the same age with identical habits can have dramatically different aging trajectories simply because of their genes. Polygenic risk scores help us see where you're strong and where you're vulnerable. And with that knowledge, we can take targeted action, sometimes years or even decades before problems would ever show up. It's a new era. Instead of guessing, we're measuring. Instead of waiting for disease, we're preventing it. Instead of treating everyone the same, we're personalizing every step. First, a quick refresher. Polygenic risk scores are essentially a way to sum up your genetic risk for a disease or trait based on the small contributions of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of genetic variants. These scores can tell us about your likelihood for things like heart disease, diabetes, certain cancers, and even aspects of aging itself. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the important part. Polygenic risk scores are powerful, but they are not flawless. Let's start with one of the biggest challenges, population bias. Most of the large genetic studies that generate the data for polygenic risk scores have been done on people of European ancestry. That's simply where the majority of the early data came from. But what does that mean for everyone else? If you're of African, Asian, Hispanic, or mixed heritage, the accuracy of your polygenic risk scores may not be as high. The predictive power drops off when you apply scores developed in one population to another. Yes, the research community is making strides to include more diverse populations, but let's be honest, we're not there yet. So if you're listening and you don't fit the typical research profile, it's important to take your PRS results with an extra grain of salt. They're still useful, but maybe not as precise as they are for someone whose ancestry matches the studied group. Here's another key point. Polygenic risk scores are probabilistic, not deterministic. Let's unpack that. If your PRS for a certain disease is high, that does not mean you are guaranteed to get that disease. Likewise, if your PRS is low, you're not magically immune. These scores are about risk and probability, not fate. Think of it like this. A high PRS is a nudge, not a prophecy. It's your genes saying, pay attention here. This is an area where you might want to be extra careful, but it doesn't seal your fate. There are people with high risk scores who live long, healthy lives, and people with low scores who face unexpected health challenges. Genetics is a major piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole picture. This brings us to the environment, the other half of the equation. Your genes load the gun, but your environment pulls the trigger, as the saying goes. Things like stress, toxins, infections, sleep, and nutrition, these can either amplify or mute the risks written in your DNA. You could have a sky-high polygenic risk score for heart disease. But if you're eating well, exercising, managing your stress, and getting good sleep, you could outrun that risk. Conversely, even with a low genetic risk, a poor lifestyle can tip the scales in the wrong direction. So, when you look at your PRS, remember, it's just one part of your health story. The choices you make every day matter just as much, if not more. Let's talk about how to actually use polygenic risk scores in your life. I love this analogy. PRS is like a weather forecast. If the forecast says there's an 80% chance of rain, you don't panic. You grab an umbrella. You plan accordingly. If it only says 20%, you still check the sky before heading out. You don't ignore the possibility, but you don't let it dictate your whole day. It's the same with polygenic risk scores. They can and should inform your choices, but they shouldn't paralyze you or give you a false sense of security. They give you a heads up, a nudge to be proactive, but they're not a crystal ball. So where does this leave us? Here's what I want you to take away. Polygenic risk scores are a powerful tool for understanding your health risks and personalizing prevention. They come with limitations, population bias, probabilistic nature, and the crucial role of environment. They are not destiny. Your daily habits, your environment, your choices, these can dramatically shift your trajectory, no matter what your genes say. We're living in a time where science is giving us incredible new insights into aging and health. But as always, it's about using these tools wisely, knowing their strengths, but also respecting their limits. As you explore your own genetics, stay curious, but stay grounded. Don't let a high polygenic risk score scare you, and don't let a low one make you complacent. Use these numbers as guides, not guarantees. Remember, you are more than your genes. So, how do we actually apply all this cutting-edge science? Let me walk you through our process, step by step, so you can see what the future of personalized, proactive medicine looks like. It all starts with a full genome sequencing. That means we're not just looking at a handful of genes, we're reading your entire genetic blueprint. This gives us the most comprehensive view possible of your unique biological landscape. Next, we calculate polygenic risk scores, and not just for one thing. We look across multiple health domains: cardiovascular health, metabolism, inflammation, mitochondrial function, and neurodegeneration. We're looking for subtle genetic signals that, when added up, tell us where your biggest health risks might lie. But we don't stop with genetics. We then overlay those risk scores with a suite of advanced data: epigenetic clocks to measure your biological age, metabolomics to see what's happening in your body, chemistry, proteomics for your protein profile, microbiome analysis to capture the state of your gut health. This creates a true 360-degree map of your health, not just your genetic risks, but how those risks are being expressed and modified in real time. Finally, we put it all together to design a prevention plan that's completely personalized, tailored to your DNA, your biology, and your life. No generic advice, no one-size-fits-all. This is medicine made just for you. Let me bring this to life with an example. A woman in her mid-40s came to us concerned because of a family history of dementia. When we ran her polygenic risk scores, we found her risk for Alzheimer's was elevated, not because of the well-known APOE4 gene, but due to dozens of smaller, less obvious genetic variants. But here's the twist. Her biological age was actually younger than her chronological age. Her inflammation markers were excellent. She was, in many ways, healthier than her years. So, did we panic? Absolutely not. Instead, we focused on building resilience. We introduced microdosed NAD+ to support cellular energy, added mitochondrial peptides for brain vitality, optimized her sleep, started cognitive training to keep her mind sharp. We weren't treating disease. We were fortifying her brain decades before any symptoms could appear. Let's talk about something I hear all the time at the Catalyst Clinic. Won't knowing my genetic risks just make me anxious? Hell, I've said the same thing too. Maybe I'll be creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a question that comes from a very human place. We're all a little afraid of what the future might hold for our health, especially if we've seen loved ones struggle with illness. The idea of peering into your DNA and uncovering hidden risks can seem intimidating, even overwhelming. But here's what I've seen. Again and again, the opposite is true. In reality, not knowing breeds a much deeper, more persistent fear. It's the kind of vague anxiety that whispers, "Am I next? Will I get sick like my parents? Is there something lurking in my genes that I can't control?" That uncertainty can color our lives with worry and helplessness. But the moment you actually see your results, your polygenic risk scores, your biological age, your strengths and vulnerabilities, something incredible happens. That fear transforms into clarity. Suddenly, it's not about doom or destiny. It's about strategy. Now, you know exactly where your vulnerabilities lie, but more importantly, you also see where you're strong. You discover the levers you can pull, the habits you can change, the steps you can take. Knowledge doesn't paralyze you, it empowers you. You're not a passive passenger on a journey toward illness. You're in the driver's seat, charting a course for resilience and longevity. That, to me, is the true gift of this science. It's not about predicting disaster. It's about transforming anxiety into action, fear into empowerment. When you know your risks, you can do something about them. And that's the foundation of ageless living. So if you're hesitating to learn about your DNA, remember, knowledge is not the enemy. Uncertainty is. When you turn the unknown into the known, you reclaim your power. And that's where real health begins. So, where does this leave us? Polygenic risk scores aren't about predicting your death. They're about guiding your life. Your genes might be the first draft of your story, but remember, you're still the author. With the insights from PRS, you actually have the power to edit your life's plot, steering it toward resilience, vitality, and longevity. That's the heart of longevity medicine. And it's exactly what we're building at the Catalyst Clinic. We're here to help you use science as a tool for living longer and living better. Thank you for joining me today. If you found this episode valuable, share it with someone who's curious about the science of ageless living. And as always, stay curious, stay proactive, and keep redefining what it means to live long and live well.